In this video, we're going to look at doing calculations with significant figures. And specifically, we're going to look at multiplication and division. I'll do a separate video for addition and subtraction. So the rules that we use for determining how many significant figures our answer can have is we look at all the numbers that we're multiplying or dividing, and whichever one has the least number of significant figures will determine how many significant figures our final result can have. So if I look at this problem, this number has 3 significant figures, because that sandwich 0 is significant. This next one has 5. And then this last number, leading zeros are not significant, so the first 0 is not significant. If there's a decimal point, then trailing zeros are significant, so that second 0 is significant, so that number has 2 significant figures. So out of all those numbers, the smallest one is 2, so that means our answer can only have 2 significant figures. So we'll just punch this into our calculator like we would normally, and when we do, the answer that gets spit out is 451.1223. All right, now most calculators don't know what a significant figure is, so it's just going to spit out all the digits it can, and then we have to truncate it to the correct number of significant figures. So we determined that our answer can only have 2 significant figures, so that means the 4 and the 5 are going to be significant, and then these other ones I can't report because we don't know that many significant figures. So in this case, the numbers after a decimal point, we can just drop them off completely. Now I can't do that with this 1, right? Because if I try to just delete that number, then I'd be left with a result of 45. And while that has the correct number of significant figures, it's not the same thing as 451, right? We've actually changed the meaning of the number, right? So that's not the result. So for these places that aren't significant to the left of the decimal point, we just turn those into zeros. So I'll change that 1 into a 0. And so I'll report my answer as 450, right? And that number just has 2 significant figures. And so that would be the answer to the correct number of significant figures. Okay, here's another example. There are no zeros in that first number, so all the digits are significant. So that has 4 significant figures. This is a trailing 0, but because there is a decimal point, that trailing 0 is significant, so that number has 3 significant figures. So I punch that in my calculator, I get 0.965901, and then the calculator keeps going, but I don't need all those. Right, and so the least number of significant figures and the 2 numbers I was working with, 3 is obviously less than 4, so my answer can have 3 significant figures. So those guys are significant. So I'm going to lop off those last ones, but in this case I have to be careful with the rounding. If this last number is 4 or less, then I don't do anything. But if it's 5 or bigger, in this case 9 is bigger than 5, then I've got to round my last digit up. So the answer would be 0.966. All right, and I have one more example. All right, so no zeros, so everybody's significant in the first number. That has 3 significant figures. This next one has 4 significant figures because the decimal point makes the trailing 0 significant. When I multiply those out, I get 12023. All right, now I know my answer should have 3 significant figures. So the 1, the 2, and the 0 are all significant. And so I'm going to change the 2 and the 3 to zeros. But when I do that, right, I have a problem because I want to indicate that this number has 3 significant figures, but because this is a trailing 0 without any decimal points, it's not significant. Right, now I could put a decimal point in. I could say, well, it's 12000, and put a decimal point, but now that number would have 5 significant figures. Right, and I can't just make it 120 point because, well, that has 3 significant figures. Right, that's the wrong number, right? There's a big difference between 12,000 and 120, so I can't do that either. So when we find ourselves in this situation, what we want to do is write the number in scientific notation, because in scientific notation, I can always report the correct number of significant figures. So in scientific notation, I'd move the decimal point over 4 spaces, so it would be 10 to the 4th. So if I write as 1.20 times 10 to the 4th, now I have the correct answer, and I've reported it to the correct number of significant figures.